So hi everyone, my name is Tony Effick and I'm a co-founder of Black and Brilliant with Perky Noah Effick. We're an advocacy group for people of all backgrounds united in creating a more diverse workforce. It started with the hashtag Black and Brilliant posted on LinkedIn. That hashtag turned into a network of people united around one goal, seeing Black and Brilliant representation in leadership across all levels, utilizing the power of our networks, skills and businesses to see change happen. We stopped just talking about it and started doing it. On a personal note, my professional background is in strategy. I've always wanted to see more people like me in the business. The numbers are improving. Let's be frank about it, but there are still too few. Black and Brilliant has therefore partnered with BeenThereDoneThat to develop a mentorship program to supercharge the strategic skills of budding young planners and strategists. So before we explain the program, let me first of all introduce some of the brilliant minds helping us behind the program. I'm going to first start with Lee. Lee, before we get into this, I'd love for you to first of all introduce yourself and also give us an overview of Been There, Done That.
So my name is Lee Roth, and I'm the North American Director at Been There, Done That. And before I even tell you about Been There, Done That, I just want to say thank you, Tony, and to Perky, and to the whole Black and Brilliant organization. It's just been such a pleasure to build this mentorship program with you. But to answer your question, Been There, Done That is a community of about 200 plus chief strategy officers, chief creative officers, design experts, comms planners, all with a minimum of 20 plus years of experience. We work in quick 1 week sprints to solve the world's biggest problems for some of the world's largest organizations. So that is Been There, Done That in about 15 seconds. I don't want to bore anyone beyond that, but we're really thrilled to partner with you, Tony.
It's fascinating because you guys have an amazing business model and a great reputation. And just building on that, Nikki, I would love to kind of get to know you a little bit more. You've got an intimidating profile and resume, an amazing career. I'd love for you to share some of that with our network and talk a little bit about your role at Been There, Done That, if that's good.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm really lucky in the sense that, you know, my job now is Global Strategy Director at Been There, Done That, which means I get to work with an extraordinary community of strategists and an extraordinary set of colleagues who I think are really sort of committed to making sure that the community that we serve gets the best briefs and gets the best problems to solve. So from that perspective, it's a really nice role because I'm facilitating other people's brilliance rather than my own all the time, which is good because that brilliance can often sort of not be there when you want it to be. As a strategist, it can be a little bit like hit and miss with strategy sometimes. Sometimes the muse is on you and sometimes it isn't. But when you're supported by sort of 300 people who are fantastically strategic and creative, your own gaps sort of get plugged quite quickly. So from that perspective, it's a dream job. My own career, I think, has probably benefited from having the most incredible, generous and amazing bosses. Because I don't think it's really possible to have a fabulous career unless you've got a boss that's looking out for you, making sure you've got the right opportunities, giving you the right levels of support and really kind of pushing you to be your best. And as a result of that, I've worked on amazing brands, but probably the biggest thing I ever worked on that probably pushed me and stressed me and tested me as a strategist was the Olympics in London in 2012, which was extraordinary. And I sort of on the tip of what we're about today, it was the most amazing sort of sense of diversity really powering what ended up being the most incredible kind of 6 weeks of my life, and I'm sure for a lot of the athletes their lives as well, because it was pretty impressive. But that's me really in a nutshell. I've had a lucky and amazing career because of other people's brilliance and generosity.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That was an amazing Olympics. We caught it for a few days while we were there. So Tom, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your career and some of those important moments, and also talk a little bit about how the agency is viewing the challenges in diversity and inclusion. You know, I know this is an area you've personally been thinking pretty deeply about.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I can verify Nikki is hugely intimidating. So not alone presuming that. So my career, I think, you know, versus Ted, Steve, and Nikki, slightly less traditional. I came into it without a plan. I've happened to be in the right place at the right time, but started out trying to do philosophy, set up a charity, tried to be a lawyer, which I wouldn't recommend anyone doing. And then happened to sort of a chance encounter, I got into innovation. And we built a small agency in the UK called Bow and Arrow. And that was kind of branding, new product and new service innovation. But that was a prime example of the role of a strategist, which is a bit kind of make it up as you go. So we had to develop a whole new process to kind of bring creativity into that quite storied and staid world of innovation. And then it grew to, I think, maybe about 100 people. And at that point, too many people wasn't quite working for me. So I decided to go and set up my own thing again. And I kind of worked in my own way as a sort of gun for hire. And it was only when I came to meet Nikki and Been There, Done That, that I thought I'd found the right place for me. As Nikki referenced, that sense of constant energy and variety and creativity, not to mention that exposure to the most amazing amount of clients, brands, and people that I hugely respect and can learn from. And kind of surprise, it's sort of come full circle, and we're sort of doing the making it up thing again, where we're having to build and develop this whole new process that's a new model for how we get brilliant, creative, and strategic thinking out there into the world. And I think that's what appeals to me as a strategist. I love these small places doing dynamic things, and Been There, Done That's doing exactly that. And I think our diversity and inclusion challenge is sort of the way I look at it is, it's the right thing to do, in the sense of morally, it is the right thing to do to be trying to move society forward and be more progressive in that respect. But it's also the smart thing to do. Our model specifically versus, even other agencies relies on diversity of thought at its heart. And diversity of thought does not come without diversity of people. So I'm really invested in helping us grow that community and bring through the next generation of diverse thinkers. Because what our clients hire us to do is give them breadth and depth. So they want us to provide that view that lights a new way that they haven't seen before, and give them exposure to the things, ideas, and people that they could otherwise not have access to. So that's why it's kind of vital to me in both senses of the word. It is the right thing to do, and it is the smart thing to do. And I'm glad we're doing it.
Thank you. I love that articulation of where you guys are at and the challenge. I'd love now to maybe pivot to Steve, and love you to share some of your background as well, particularly diving into some of the early days and the key moments, if there was a moment. And at the beginning, we kind of was joking around about the nature of what strategy is. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what strategy means to you. A lot of people look at roles like this and they think, oh, I don't know if I could do that, and I wonder if you could demystify a little bit from your perspective about what strategy means to you, as well as those key moments.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tony. So, as kind of Tom said, I've taken a little bit more of a traditional role through the business, and that I've kind of always worked at, medium or large size agencies. And that's been a combination of, traditional ad agencies like Deutsch, big global networks like McCann and Ogilvy. I actually helped do a startup, a global startup, which was called Nitro, which had offices in Shanghai and the UK and New York. And then we got acquired by Sapient. So I learned the kind of technology and the digital side of the business through that experience. So
I remember Nitro. I didn't know
Nitro. We can talk about that offline. Those were some crazy entrepreneurial days with a real charismatic founder. And I think some of my early experiences were the really good early experiences. I remember I actually worked on IKEA. It was my very first client at Deutsch. And I had a really wonderful boss. Nikki talked about mentors. And I had a really wonderful boss who kind of gave me the freedom to experiment and the freedom to fail on a number of projects. And he was there for me when I had questions, but also gave me the kind of I guess the rope to hang myself, if you will, to kind of screw up, but also to succeed on my own terms. And having that experience with the boss who really trusted you and was there to fill in the gaps was what gave me a lot of confidence and helped me believe that this kind of ephemeral process of strategy that maybe is a little bit intimidating when you first walk into it was something that I had the aptitude and the skills and the orientation to be successful in. So I had a few of those moments were really powerful for me. You're asking also, Tony, the $1 million question or the $1 billion question now, which is what is strategy? And I think, you'd ask everyone in this room, we'd probably have our own different definitions, because I think the world in which we operate, the problems that we are trying to solve for our clients is changing so rapidly. I kind of think of strategy as a structured way of identifying the problems that need to be solved and then building the bridges towards a solution. And to me, that bridge building part is important for strategy, because there is a handoff at some point to a creative brain who is going to take the inspiration of the strategy and make something in the world. So the bridge building to me is really important, and it's building the bridge from, I think, the problem to the inspiration for your creative partners, but it's also building the bridge from the creative idea to the rationale for your clients, because everybody kind of needs to take the leap and cross that chasm. Creatives need to be inspired, and clients need to have the confidence and the rationalization that it is indeed the right solution to the problem that they face, and they're not just funding creativity for the sake of creativity, but for the purpose of solving a real business problem.
Thank you for that, Steve. That's very helpful. Talking about bridges, because I like that concept. Ted, one of the things, Ted, I love you to talk to, because your career spans digital, experiential, content-driven work. So in many respects, your bridges cross many rivers, yeah? So you connect many places together. This is in many respects, a very unique skill set. And I think, my question is that we've talked a little bit about, so Tom talked a lot about, luck and falling into things and kind of things just happening. Was there design behind that, or was that just pure serendipity on your side? Kind of like, how did you build so many bridges, and did you know which rivers you were going to cross?
Oh, of course not. No. So thanks, Tony. So I'm Ted Fleuret. I'm a brand strategy director working with BeenThereDoneThat. I think my career has felt more like just kind of something tumbling down a river more than a bridge. But I got my start, like Steve, working in the Alphabet holding company agencies of New York, the DDB, JWT. Then I went out west, worked with Goodby and Silverstein and Partners for about 6 years before coming back to head up strategy at Droga 5. And around at that point, I started getting a little nervous because I thought I have a lot of creative kind of experience, but I wanted to get a little more of that product experience. So that was a deliberate kind of shift where I went to Huge to help run their brand strategy discipline there and get smarter on kind of digital production and digital product before I kind of had enough of that and then had a brand strategy at Forsman and Bodenfors, which is a big Swedish creative shop. I guess the thing that I keep coming back to is that at the end of the day, it's all about experience design. I have my background and the things that I enjoy are things like evolutionary psychology, consumer psychology, the intersection of design and kind of how we process stuff. So from back in the day where you had kings and bishops creating cathedrals and castles and stuff, it was always about using art in the service of kind of creating influence or creating some kind of an experience for folks. And so, from soap operas onwards, we've always been in the business of kind of bringing some art into our culture, sponsored by commerce. And so for me, it's never really, standing back, at the time it made no sense, but now looking back at it, it does feel like the tools will change, but the kind of the actual palette that we're creating for is human nature and human psychology. So whether you're creating a VR headset or a beautiful architectural form or some kind of an intricate online experience, it's all about just ultimately kind of trying to kind of share that experience with your audience. And therefore I think the art of strategy, to Steve's point, is to first define that experience between you, your creatives, and your clients, so that you're speaking the same language, and to translate that into something that feels like a unified and intentional thing that people will be delighted and inspired by. So that might be the through line, regardless of the kind of the channel palette or the kind of the digital tool set. So
fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Ted. Nikki, I'd love to kind of pivot a little bit more now, so we can start talking a little bit about that kind of that breaking into the business. I know I just found this business by accident. I didn't go to some careers officer when I was 13 years old, and everyone was saying I want to be a fireman, and I said I want to be a strategist. So I didn't even know it existed. And I just remember just like encountering somebody in a meeting one time, and I thought, okay, I think I'd like to do that. But if it wasn't that moment, if it wasn't that encounter, I wouldn't have even known the business existed. And then I, through a series of little mini steps, I kind of gradually made my way into the business. So Nikki, my question to you is that kind of strategy roles are some of the most sought after in the business, you know, advertising, media, technology, you name it. Can you talk a little bit about what you think are the biggest challenges facing young talent with breaking into strategy, regardless of ethnicity or background? It's just like, it's a tough thing to get into. So why is it so tough, and what do you think are the challenges people face when they're coming through when they're young?
I think our industry has created a lot of the challenges of getting in, because I think it has made it quite a rarefied department to get into, sort of put strategy on a kind of pedestal, which I'm not entirely sure is the best place for it, because it should be really hardworking and it should be quite gritty and real. And I think, you know, I think one of the big challenges for a lot of people coming in is not having what is seen as a traditional kind of educational background of a strategist, which I think has really damaged the business to a certain extent, and I think is showing up quite dramatically now, in the sense that we are lacking a lot of diversity of thinking, because people have almost hired to type. So I think one of the big challenges, and I still think one of the big challenges, is how we create environments where anybody can be a strategist regardless of background, but more importantly, we definitely look for that diversity in background, because that is what strategy really gets powered by, is different opinions, different perspectives, different ways of looking at the world is what makes it such a fascinating job to have. So I think the challenge is still there structurally. You know, have you got the right resume? Have you been to the right school? All of that sort of stuff. It is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. So I still think that's a challenge, and we should be aware of that on our side of the fence and on the other side of the fence when you haven't actually got your job yet. I think the other challenge is knowing where to start. And do you need a degree in marketing strategy or advertising strategy? And I don't think I've ever employed anybody who's gone and done a marketing degree or a strategy degree or whatever it might be. I just feel like the biggest challenge you have is making sure that people understand how curious you are. Don't try and be the perfect finished article before you start doing the job. Be the curious bundle of human energy that just wants to find out the truth, because ultimately that's what makes a great strategist. So I think, you know, challenge yourself not to try and put on the clothes of something that you think will get the job. Just be yourself and develop those talents that mean that you're curious and bright and open to opinion and ideas. And I think another challenge massively is, I'm not entirely sure we do a very good job of describing what it is. So again, to that point of what is the role of a strategist, it's kind of really hard to explain to somebody outside of the business what you do. I mean, I still tell my mum I write ads because that's the only thing she can really understand. And if I told her what I really did, she'd be like, what do you mean you write presentations? That's a bit weird, isn't it? Is that all you do all day? So I think I think we need to get better at selling the dynamism of it, the creativity of it, the kind of beauty of it. Because if you say strategy to somebody, it's like a really kind of like boring word. You know, strategists, it's colonels and generals and people who do serious business stuff. And actually, I don't want those people. I want the people who don't think like that, because strategy in this world needs to feel really fresh and really different and be creative. So I kind of go, the word itself, doesn't really sell us very well. So one of the challenges is when you look at that word, maybe you get put off and we lose out because we're not attracting the people who are the really kind of bright, curious people, because it's like, oh my God, strategy sounds like I should be kind of like, you know, in a bowler hat and a suit. And that puts people off. So I think the biggest challenge is not to be put off, to be yourself, to make sure that people understand who you are so that you really can make an impact in your own way. And I think, you know, definitely, I think the challenge on us is really opening up that kind of framework of what makes a great strategist and why we pull people in from different directions and different backgrounds. So challenge is more on us probably than on young people.
I love that. I love that. It's very so refreshing to hear. Just on a personal note, I just remember kind of being in some of my first initial roles and being so intimidated walking into certain meetings. I mean, I made it into my early meetings, and I was a kid from a South London council estate, and I went into these storied agencies. And you know, everyone was Oxbridge, everyone was super well educated from good backgrounds, and I just remember sometimes just being intimidated, being myself. And I always thank the Lord for the internet because that was the disruptive thing that gave me the break. Otherwise, I wouldn't have moved beyond the stage one. So it's great to know now that this thinking has got to a place where now we're just looking for that freshness. I think that's so important. I appreciate that, Nikki. Thank you for that. Tom, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about one of the issues we talk about in Black and Brilliant is this idea of breaking through the middle, because I think we're seeing an increasing number of people kind of come in at entry level. But we know as a strategist, you obviously want to kind of get bigger briefs, you want to work on bigger projects, you want to build your profile, you maybe want to become a manager. I just wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about what you think the biggest challenges and opportunities our strategists will face during their career. What should they be looking out for, you know, on the horizon, the road ahead as they kind of like graduate in their career?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, you want to believe that great work is seen and is rewarded. And I think to some degree, there has to be a little bit of personal branding in there. You want to feel like you've taken ownership of a project and done some work, and be prepared to talk about that confidently and proudly, and don't shy away from the work you've done, because the strategy ultimately kind of can tend to fade into the background, because often it is, like Steve said, the bridge to creativity. So, you know, the ad or the piece of content at the end of it is what gets all the plaudits. But I think it's important for strategists to recognize the hard work they've done and be recognized for the hard work they've done. And I think, to me, the biggest challenge that I've faced, and I mean, it's pretty universal human challenge, is fear and discomfort. And when it comes to strategy, you have to sort of get really comfortable with discomfort. You have to put your hand up to be the blank sheet of paper guy or girl, and recognize that no task, no client, no brief will ever be the same. And as Steve referred to as well, that ask from the client and the shifting sands of this marketing world we live within create this sense of kind of fear and discomfort, and it becomes hard to step forward and take ownership in that context. And you're never quite 100% sure what it is exactly you do, or whether you're any good at it. I'm still very much unsure. And so there's all that fear that we have to fight against, I think. And you know, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, I suppose, is the old adage. But I've certainly, through being mentored by the right people, through sticking my hand up and jumping into uncomfortable situations, those have been the periods of really stretchy growth when I've done things that I'm very proud of and things that have been recognized and sort of tangibly moved my career forward. And I think the other massive challenge for me is that strategy, to some degree, is about simplification. And the world is getting infinitely more complex. There are more things, more people, more cultures, more products than there ever will be, and there'll be double that next year. So our role as simplifiers of that world is, I think, the biggest challenge and the biggest value we can add. But it's scary to write 5 words when you could write a paragraph, and you know, there's almost this presumption that if you're PowerPoint is only 5 slides wrong, you haven't done much work. But actually, the act of simplification is the single hardest thing I think that that I have to do, we have to do as strategists. And the other part of the question that you asked was, where do the opportunities lie? And it seems to be kind of a familiar theme with everything I'm saying, is that it's all a bit nebulous, and the role of a strategist is a bit unwritten. But for the new crop of strategists coming through, they've got this huge opportunity to rewrite the way we do things. So I think, you know, the building blocks may always be the same. It's about cultural understanding and insight and how you use that to solve business problems and how you take that and inspire a creative with it. But I think beyond that is so unwritten, and the world is changing so fast and culture's moving forward so fast that people who are really culturally tuned in and bold and brave enough to simplify things their way and lay out a vision are going to be incredibly valuable. And actually that is going to be easier to do for younger, less staid, less kind of old school thinking strategists. And they're, I think, are going to be able to kind of bring that value to bear in the next couple of years. So my advice would be, yeah, be bold about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I love the idea of that blank sheet of paper and the intimidation of that, and looking at a sheet of paper and thinking, I have to at some point stand in front of a room of people and what was a blank sheet of paper to essentially a belief I want everybody to buy into. And there is something incredibly important about that process. And I just always remember that moment where you stood in front of the room, you kind of recast what their brief was, and then you say, okay, here's my interpretation of where we think you should go. And there's a moment of truth there, if ever there was one. Steve, I'd love you to build on that, because I mean, one of the things Tom talked about was this idea of kind of making the right decisions and, kind of knowing kind of like the, almost like a personal brand thing. I think once I understood the business and got into the business, I started to realize, man, I wish I knew now. I wish I knew then what I know now. And I think there is a bunch of cheat codes in the business, a bunch of things that maybe kind of like we should all kind of have. And I had, for example, which kind of brands and to work on, which people to work with. There's a whole bunch of things that I think are really important. Having a certain kind of confidence about your own personal inner voice, because I think we all carry some of that in the work that we do. I would love you to talk a little bit about what you think some of these cheat codes are that you wish you knew then, that you know now, and maybe only things an insider would know. So what are the cheat codes an up-and-coming strategist should maybe be aware of?
I love this question. I've been actually thinking about this since yesterday night when you sent some of these around. I think it's fascinating because some of these you're right, you don't realize until after, like, oh my God, had I known that was a shortcut or a fast track to the kind of experience I wanted. God, I had to learn it the hard way. Wouldn't it have been great if someone had told me early? I think there's certainly there's a bunch. We'll all have our own. I think a few that resonated with me as I was kind of thinking over my own career and just folks, really successful juniors that I've seen. One is, it kind of comes out of this notion of a teaching hospital, right? The old kind of see, do, teach is the order that kind of doctors, somewhat scarily, doctors only need to see a procedure once before they're doing it, and then they're teaching others to do it. But the beginning is experience. You want to kind of be a sponge and soak up as much of the process and the kind of messiness of the folks who are a little more experienced than you. So I think a hack is volunteer to own the deck. Is one way of sticking yourself right in the center of the creative strategic mess. It can be really painful because then you have 12 people looking over your shoulder trying to art direct your kerning and your font size and your diagrams.
This made me laugh, you saying that. That's fantastic. I love that one.
But at the center of it is an incredible learning opportunity, and you'll get to meet a lot of the more senior and experienced people just through the process. So that there's some risk and pain in that, but I think owning the deck early in your career is really useful. This was one that is kind of a little more on the empathy side, but there's a point in the process of developing work that the emphasis shifts from strategy in the driver's seat to creative in the driver's seat. And I think being able to know when that has happened, to feel that inflection point, is important because it shifts the role you can play as a strategist. You still have a role, importantly, afterwards, but I think in the beginning, strategy might be driving the car. And then at some point, you're driving maybe a little more from the back. You're still influencing the work, but you're not saying yes or no necessarily to creatives. More, you're nudging and influencing and shaping the raw ideas that are already out there to be more effective in delivering the strategic intent. And I think the empathy of knowing that moment and kind of shifting your outlook and behavior accordingly can be really helpful for engaging with creatives and also continuing to drive the work. And then the third one I'd say is maybe a little bit later in your career, is maybe more for the question you're asking, Tom, around kind of that mid-level moments. Like I probably unsurprisingly to the folks on the call who know me, I had a bit of an arrogance problem when I was a youngish strategist, in the sense that I thought I always had to, I felt like it was my responsibility as the strategist to have the smartest idea in the room. Always this burden and this fear and these expectations that I had to have the smartest idea in the room. And then at some point, a mentor kind of helped me see the light, which is, all you need to do is make sure that the smartest idea emerges from the room. It doesn't have to be yours. It doesn't have to be any individuals, but as you become a little more senior and you're either running a room or you're running a team, to really shift to saying, hey, how can I create an environment where the best, smartest ideas are people are free to kind of say those unexpected things. And then as a leader, can I pull the idea from maybe the back of the room, or the soft-spoken lady who is brilliant but isn't going to have that A-type personality that's shouting? How can I know the look in her eye when she's got a spark and go, hey, say that louder. Let's hear that. Let's all talk about that in the center of the room. So that shift from feeling the responsibility of having the smartest idea to creating the environment where those ideas can be free to emerge was a big mid-level shift.
I love that. I love those. The last two for me linked together. And I remember that moment where you hand over to creative. That was a very uncomfortable moment for me. It was like I was handing over my baby to somebody else. And but that links to the third thing you said, which is actually wasn't my baby to hand over. I was just a steward of our baby at that point, and so that moment where you are stewarding an idea through to creative, I think that's incredibly important. And then you're kind of almost like, I don't know if it's maybe it's a wrong analogy, but you're kind of at that moment orchestrating an idea, and at that point you hand the baton over to the to the creative team, but you're still playing the role in it.
Yeah, I think that choreography is a big word for most leaders in strategy, and that like you're bringing together clients and creatives and different kind of strategists and consumers and other experts, and how do you kind of weave all these smart people and their insight into a coherent story? Sometimes that's the role. You don't create, to Nikki's point, like you're not creating anything except you're creating the story that allows everybody else to operate in a way that brings out the best of their thinking but connects the dots.
Wonderful. Ted, do you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about the kind of the best strategy advice you've got, or you can just jump off on this point if you prefer?
No, I mean, the best strategy advice, I think maybe I'll just pick up where Steve was grooving to. I mean, it took me a while to realize that a lot of strategists can feel like the smartest people in the room because they've probably had like a week or two head start, have gone really deep, have all the knowledge, and then they get to walk in and say, "Hey guys, here's what we're going to do." But the most effective things I've ever helped, kind of create have ended up being kind of like writers' tables at some point, where you get into this kind of rhythm where the creatives, the account people, your clients, you're just getting into this yes and kind of improv comedy kind of moment where something that somebody said unlocks something, and then you build that. And that's really why it's so important to have those diversity of perspectives in a room. At the end of the day, there is no real single source of truth unless you surround it with a lot of different ways in, a lot of different perspectives. So to Tom's point, like when you create a diverse organization, you're actually just creating a more powerfully insightful organization, because you've aggregated all of these different lots of blind people touching the elephant. And so you have a higher fidelity vision of both the challenge that you have to solve and the ways forward to creatively do that. So I think that's always been, the secret sauce, which is to try to kind of perspective shift your creatives and your clients into the perspective of the audience that you're working with, to shift that audience's perspective into the kind of the desired vision of the brand or the company that you're working with. So it's always this kind of missionary type experience. And the number one thing for strategy is to go out into the world and actually just like engage with the people that you're going to be talking to. You know, I work with hedge fund folks who are still like, you know, they're looking at rare earth mineral stuff, and their lead analysts are going into the mines for 3 days just to understand what that is. And I think that boots on the ground and those kind of, you know, those kind of like human connections, when you can surface those and you can bring it back to these complex kind of marketing and advertising endeavors, is still kind of grounded in kind of an empathy you build on the ground with people. And the more people who have had more of those connections, the higher fidelity the picture that you're the strategic picture that you're creating, so that you can move forward and make awesome stuff.
That's great, Ted. I love that this notion of the strategic picture. The kind of you know, if anything, a strategist is somebody who's plugged in. You know, whether cultural, the anthropological, the ethnographic view, the diving into the mind type thing. You know, in that respect, when we think about culture and we think about, you know, globally, not just in the United States, over the last year, we had the death of George Floyd. You know, it's this poignant, the most poignant anti-racism message of a generation. It just rippled around the world in so many places, in so many unexpected ways. And so as people plugged into culture, Black Lives Matter obviously is something that has been on your radar, you know, lit large on the radar. So what impact do you think that had on the work of a strategist or somebody? I'm asking this to anybody who is looking at the world culturally, is trying to be plugged in. How does that start to change the work?
I think it
Anyone?
has to change the work. I mean, it has to change the work. It just makes me angry that it took somebody to die to change the work, if you see what I mean. And I think that's the really big shift that we have to make as marketers, is to stop waiting for things to happen and reacting to them, and using our voice to be proactive in that conversation. And I think for far too long, we as an industry have reacted to stuff like this and then jumped on it and tried to look like we were ahead of the game when we really weren't. We were really behind the curve. And I think, you know, what I think I found actually quite misstepped was how quickly people jumped on this thing, but you're just kind of like, but you should have been on this years ago. Now it's not good enough now. And I think it made me quite angry, actually. It was, and I think just the kind of sheer sort of exhaustion that the Black community must have felt when everybody started jumping on it, which is just like, yeah, where have you been? And wake up. So I think there's a big issue around us stopping reacting to this stuff and start to be proactive. Therefore, it is really important that we hear voices that have that reality and have that connection that can actually make us proactive in that space and push those ideas much further than the marketing community has been prepared to push them before. And it's not about apologizing, and it's not about saying you're sorry, and it's not about doing this. It's actually physically doing something that makes a difference. And we have the power to do that. We have big budgets and we can reach millions and billions of people every day. And we can choose to do that brilliantly through strategy and empathy and all of those really good things, or we can waste it. And I think up until, well, I think we're still doing it to a certain extent. I think we've wasted our voice, and why we need a more diverse workforce is so that voice is heard and we get proactive about it.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to just a bit of an impromptu question, and I'm just conscious of time. I'm probably going to skip towards the end, but you bring up something that really is on my mind. It's always been on my mind, which is like, is the role of a strategist to reflect society? Nikki, you just put this in my head, or because you're implying that you're not just putting a mirror up to society, you're actually leading society. You're saying here is, whether, if you think about, is it you want to self-actualize, or you want to dream about the future, or you want to have a purpose? Is that something that you're driving the world towards, or is it actually you're putting a mirror up? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that. Nikki, you might be able to have a shot at that first.
Well, I will let somebody else say it as well, but no, I don't think our role is to hold a mirror up anymore. I think, how much stuff does the world need? How many more products does the world need? I think, you know, there comes a point, and self-actualization in business, where we kind of go, we can earn a good living and we can also use our dollars to kind of make the world a better place. And that's where purpose and social responsibility really come to the fore. When you have that platform, it's not enough to just be taking people's money. You've got to be shaping society. You've got to be making something different. You've got to be trying to make it better. Because if you're not, what's the point? You know, that we used to make better products that made people's lives better. Well, you know, how many more better products can we make? We've now got to really make people's lives better through different means. So holding the mirror up for me, no longer good enough.
I think holding the mirror up, you're always going to be looking, it's always going to be backwards looking, almost by definition. Like, right, you're going to be capturing the present, which is immediately going to become the past. I think if like we can work with our brands and our clients to say what's a better future, and that can be everything from better product to better purpose to more inclusivity. Like you like, it gets back to my bridge building metaphor. Like, all right, on the other side of that chasm, we have an idea of what we want the future to look like. How do we get there? How do we build that together through communications, through experience, through all of the tools at our disposal? But you got to have a little bit of a, you know, of a view out front. I remember, you guys remember Faith Popcorn, right? She's been in the business for a long time. Her like the positioning of her first company was, you know, hey CEO, you don't have a chief future officer in your company, someone who's only looking ahead over the horizons, but you should, because that's where all your growth comes from and all your risk is going to come from. And that was her positioning for her first company. And I always thought that was brilliant, and is a role that has always been needed, but arguably even more today. Someone inside a company who's looking out ahead in front of the horizon and helping to pull the company into a better future.
Yeah, and there's a really tricky, there's a tricky dialectic or a tricky interaction here between not just reflecting back what you've already kind of told the culture that it wants, or else you're just going to go, hey, they're all consumerists, you know, and looking in the rearview mirror. The real thing is that if we really hear what we're saying when we say we're not just going to give people what they want, is that's a higher standard, and strangely, you have to actually be better versed with the past, really understand human nature, understand people's needs, not just what they say, not just what they've been told to say, not just what the environment tells them they should be into. But that's a really kind of authoritative thing to say in a world where, you know, a lot of authority structures are corrupt and all of that stuff. So I think this is a really fascinating time where we're trying to kind of move away from socially constructed consumerism with a very specific kind of look and point of view, but we also need to replace it with something that still allows us for some common ground and some kind of things that look like timeless human insights and truths that can transcend even what the past tells us. But ironically, I think you might have to go a little further into the past to really kind of connect with the things that really make people happy and really gives their lives meaning, you know, not just what they say or what they've been told to think, but fundamentally what it is that will give them a flourishing life. And that makes the job of a strategist, I think, way harder as an authority figure in a time when we're trying to be more inclusive and less dictatorial about what it is to believe in the truth of something. So fascinating times, you know.
All right, Tom, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, and I mean, the last thing I was going to say is I think what this whole period has exposed, I think from a strategic perspective, is that we were getting pretty lazy and trite about what culture meant, as if culture was just kind of handpicking music, food, movies, and that was kind of our reference point in culture. And if we felt like we sort of understood the movements within that, then we'd be pretty spot on in terms of kind of understanding what people want. And I think culture runs so much deeper than that, and seeing the ability of an entire generation to organize and deliberately do something meaningful, for me, has just been a real wake-up call. And if we are going to be strategists and understanders of culture and shifters of culture, we absolutely need to go a hell of a lot deeper on understanding, you know, where culture is at today in that much broader sense. And again, that leads us right back down the path to how do we get those voices and those people in the room to help us do that job.
Love that. And I'm going to now hand over just to Lee, just to close us out and just talk a little bit about the program itself. And so the question, Lee, is obviously we're incredibly excited by this. We thank you for your allyship and championing this. But we do this program where a year in the future, you time traveled and you look back and it's been a huge success. So what do you believe you'd have loved to have achieved just having looked back from that time vantage point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the immediate term, we want to see a new generation of strategists that are happy and fulfilled and enthusiastic and most importantly, confident in their abilities and in their future. We want to see careers that are measurably moving forward and progressing. Over the long run, if I could take that same hourglass or that same measurement and fast forward in 5-10 years, we want to see a generation of marketing and advertising leaders that look and think very different than this generation's of leaders. I think that's really important. So I think for the short term, we want people who are happy and confident and fulfilled. Over the long term, we want to make sure that our industry is shaped very differently in the future than it is today.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been, I mean, I wish I had some more time to hang out with you guys. This has been an amazing conversation. It's a good start to my day. But I just want to thank you all again for joining us for this and for championing this program. And so more details are to follow. Check our website, blackandbrilliant.org, or follow us on LinkedIn for more details. And thank you. And thank you to everyone on the call today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
I love that. Thanks, guys. That was amazing.